Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever heard a recording of your own voice and cringed? Have you felt a strange sense of embarrassment or even disbelief, wondering, is that really how I sound? If your answer is yes, let me assure you, you are not alone. I too have felt that way. In fact, I used to hate the sound of my own voice. It felt unfamiliar, awkward, and far from the confident tone I imagined I had. But today I want to share with you why that feeling exists, how it affects us, and what we can do about it. When we speak, the way we perceive our own voice is not the same as how others hear it. This is due to a scientific phenomenon involving both air conduction and bone conduction. Air conduction refers to the way sound travels through the air into our ears. This is how we hear other people. But when we speak ourselves, our vocal cords create vibrations that also travel through the bones in our skull. This bone conduction adds a layer of depth and resonance to our voice that only we can hear. It gives the voice a fuller, bass-heavy quality, which is why we often feel our voice sounds more powerful or pleasant in our own head. However, when we listen to a recording of ourselves speaking, we only hear our voice through air conduction, just like everyone else does. That internal richness and depth provided by bone conduction are suddenly missing. What we hear instead is a sharper, thinner, and often higher-pitched version of our voice. This drastic change creates a mismatch between what we expect and what we actually hear. Floor, it can be startling and even unsettling, as if we're listening to someone else entirely. It may feel like a betrayal of sorts. After all, we've spent our whole lives hearing one version of ourselves, only to be confronted with an unfamiliar one. This biological disconnect plays a major role in why so many people dislike their recorded voice. The version we are accustomed to feels more authentic because we've lived with it internally for so long. When we hear ourselves from an external source, it can sound foreign and artificial. It's not just that it sounds different, it feels different. Our minds can interpret this change as a flaw, when in reality it is simply a difference in how sound is transmitted. Understanding this distinction is important because it helps us see that there's nothing wrong with our voice. It's just science at play. There are no wrong with our voice. It's just science at play. Moreover, they hear in playback is how others perceive us. The VTA in Cringe, in defense experience. It may lead us to doubt whether others perceive us, the voice they hear in playback is out to judge them. The voice may begin avoiding situations where they defy element. Those things may begin avoiding situations. But in truth, people around us are already used to hearing our voice through air conduction, and to them that voice is natural and consistent. The real challenge lies in bridging the gap between internal perception and external reality. The discomfort we feel upon hearing our own recorded voice is far more universal than most people realize. Nearly everyone experiences that same sense of awkwardness or disbelief when they first hear themselves played back on a device. It is a strangely personal moment, and many people are surprised by how deeply it affects them. Whether it's a voicemail, a video recording, or a public speech, hearing your own voice outside of your body often creates a moment of self-centeredness that is both unexpected and unsettling. What's important to understand is that this reaction is entirely normal and shared by countless individuals, regardless of age, background, or level of self-consciousness. Psychologists explain this reaction as a cognitive dissonance. What we think we sound like clashes with what we actually sound like to the outside world. This sudden realization can feel like a minor identity crisis, where the voice we believed to be a core part of ourself, re-axiate, doesn't align with reality. Many people describe it as jarring, even disturbing, because they were so attached to the internal version of their voice. This discomfort can be magnified in social settings, especially when others are listening too, as it creates a fear of judgment or embarrassment. People might laugh nervously or make self-deprecating remarks like, "Do I really sound like that?" as a way to deflect their discomfort. Because the reaction is so common, it often leads to the false assumption that something is wrong with the voice itself. People may start to believe that their voice is unattractive, annoying, or even unprofessional, simply because it doesn't match their expectations. This kind of self-criticism can be incredibly damaging over time. It can cause individuals to become overly self-certain in conversations, shy away from opportunities to speak in public, or even avoid hearing recordings of themselves altogether. These behavioral patterns can interfere with personal and professional development, especially in roles that require vocal expression, such as teaching, leadership, or performance. Furthermore, the rise of digital communication platforms like social media, video conferencing, and voice messaging has made it increasingly difficult to avoid hearing our own voice. This constant exposure can either desensitize us or deepen our discomfort, depending on how we respond to it. For some, repeated listening can normalize the sound and reduce the negative reaction over time. For others, it reinforces a cycle of self-doubt, at least regardless. The widespread nature of this discomfort should remind us that we are not alone in feeling this way. Acknowledging its commonality is the first step toward overcoming the emotional barrier it creates. Our voice is more than just a tool for communication. It is a deeply personal part of who we are. From the moment we begin to speak as children, our voice becomes one of the primary ways we express thoughts, emotions, and individuality. Over time, we form an internal connection with how we think we sound. This sound becomes part of our self-concept, a core element of our identity. It's not something we consciously notice every day, but we grow attached to this version of ourselves. It's how we imagine we sound in conversations, how we think others hear us, and how we present ourselves to the world through spoken words. When we hear a recording of a voice and it sounds different from what we've always believed, that difference can create a ripple of emotional conflict. Suddenly we question whether the voice we thought was confident, warm, or friendly actually comes across that way to others. This creates a mental disconnect between self-perception and reality, which can lead to discomfort, embarrassment, and even a sense of personal insecurity. Because our voice feels so tied to our character and emotional presence, Any dissonance between how we think we sound and how we're actually heard can strike a nerve more deeply than we expect. This issue of identity and voice goes even deeper when we realize that we often use our voice to construct a social image. We try to sound professional in meetings, soothing with loved ones, or energetic in social situations. The voice becomes a dynamic part of how we interact with different people and environments. So when we hear ourselves sounding strange, high-pitched, or awkward on a recording, it can feel like our social mask has been removed and something vulnerable is exposed. This exposure may cause us to retreat, fearing that what others hear doesn't match the version of ourselves we are trying to portray. In many cases, people begin to modify their speech patterns or vocal tone in an effort to correct this perceived flaw. Some may speak less, lower their volume, or try to mimic other voices they consider more pleasant. Others may become overly focused on articulation and delivery, which adds stress and discomfort to speaking. All of this stems from the emotional weight we attach to our voice, treating it not just as a sound, but as a reflection of our worth, personality, and credibility. When our identity feels threatened by something as simple as a playback recording, it shows just how significant the voice is in shaping our sense of self. Disliking our own voice doesn't remain a private insecurity. It often spills over into how we communicate with others. The discomfort we feel when we hear ourselves can lead to a heightened sense of self-consciousness every time we speak. We may begin second-guessing how we sound in real time, adjusting our tone or pace unnaturally, which interferes with the fluidity and authenticity of our speech. Rather than focusing on the message we want to deliver, our minds become occupied with how we are being perceived. This inner distraction can weaken our conversations. As the self-silenceness grows, some people may begin to limit their verbal expression altogether. They might speak less in group discussions, avoid contributing to class or work meetings, or choose to communicate more through text instead of voice or video. This retreat into silence is not due to a lack of ideas or intelligence, but rather a fear of judgment based solely on vocal appearance. It becomes easier to stay quiet than to risk embarrassment or discomfort. Over time, this avoidance can lead to missed opportunities for connection, collaboration, and personal growth. In more public scenarios, such as presentations, performances, or even casual voice messages, the pressure intensifies. The anxiety about how one's voice sounds can lead to stage fright, nervous habits, or the complete withdrawal from speaking roles. Many talented individuals who possess valuable insights and creativity choose to remain in the background, not because they lack the ability to express themselves, but because their insecurity about their voice has convinced them they aren't good enough to be heard. This internalized belief prevents a vicious cycle where fear prevents practice and lack of practice reinforces fear. This communication barrier doesn't just affect individuals, it can influence teams, relationships, and entire communities. When people feel unable to express themselves freely, It stifles idea sharing, emotional support, and leadership. Relationships may suffer because one person holds back from voicing emotions or thoughts, afraid their tone will sound wrong or unconvincing. In the workplace, a person might not pitch an idea or ask a question, not due to lack of preparation, but because they are uneasy about how their voice might be received. In this way, the simple discomfort of hearing one's own voice can create invisible walls between people, limiting not only personal confidence, but also the quality of human interaction. One of the most damaging myths about our voices is the belief that there is such a thing as a perfect voice. Society and media have often pushed certain vocal tones as more desirable. Deep, smooth, polished voices are frequently associated with authority, attractiveness, or professionalism. As a result, we internalize these ideals and start comparing our natural voice to an unrealistic standard. This comparison leads to disappointment and self-criticism. We begin to think our voice is too high, too nasal, too soft, too rough, or simply not good enough. These judgments often have no real basis. They are rooted in perception, not fact. What we fail to realize is that the idea of a universally appealing voice is both subjective and culturally influenced. What sounds pleasing or professional in one context might sound dull or overbearing in another. Accents, intonations, and speech patterns vary across regions and communities, and each has its own beauty and richness. They are not meant to be carbon copies of a media-trained sound. When we chase a standard voice type, we ignore the uniqueness that makes our own voice valuable. We forget that authenticity resonates more than a forced performance. This obsession with vocal perfection can also prevent people from exploring their natural vocal range. Rather than speaking freely, individuals may start over-controlling their pitch or pace in an attempt to sound better. This often leads to speech that feels stiff and unnatural, removing the warmth and spontaneity that make communication feel alive. Over time, these forced adjustments can even damage the vocal cords or lead to chronic tension while speaking. More importantly, they suppress the personal qualities that give someone's voice its charm and individuality. It's important to remember that even the most famous speakers, broadcasters, or performers didn't start with perfect voices. They learned to use what they had with confidence, clarity, and emotion. Some of the most memorable voices in history were unique, imperfect, and unmistakably real. The goal is not to erase what makes your voice different, but to embrace it. Instead of seeing it as a flaw, we must begin to see it as a strength, a representation of our story, background, and personality. A perfect voice isn't the one that sounds like everyone else's. It's the one that sounds like you. In a world saturated with rehearsed speeches, edited videos, and filtered voices, authenticity stands out. While people may admire a polished delivery or a deep, commanding tone, what truly captures their attention is sincerity. A voice that conveys real emotion, vulnerability, and truth connects with listeners far more deeply than one that sounds mechanically perfect. This is because human beings are naturally drawn to what feels real. The little imperfections in someone's voice, a crack when they're emotional, a laugh in the middle of a sentence, or a moment of hesitation, these all create a sense of closeness and relatability. We often think that to be taken seriously, our voice must sound like a news anchor or professional speaker. But this belief overlooks the power of individual presence. Think about some of the most influential figures in history. Many had voices that were unconventional, even criticized, but their impact was never diminished. What made them memorable wasn't a flawless tone, but the passion, conviction, and truth behind their words. The same applies to each of us. When we speak from a place of honesty and emotion, our message gains weight and meaning. People are far more likely to remember how you made them feel than how polished you sounded. In personal relationships, this authenticity is even more important. A friend or loved one doesn't care if your voice has the perfect pitch. They care about the feelings your voice communicates. Whether it's comfort, encouragement, excitement, or empathy. The authenticity in your tone builds trust and emotional connection. When we try to suppress our natural voice in favor of sounding more refined or better, we often lose some of that emotional depth. We start communicating from our heads instead of our hearts, and others can sense that disconnect. Authentic voices carry the power to strengthen bonds and make conversations more meaningful. Authenticity also empowers us. When we accept and use our voice without constantly trying to adjust it to fit a standard, we gain confidence in who we are. We begin to realize that we don't need to sound like someone else to be respected or heard. This shift in mindset liberates us from the constant pressure to perform and allows us to focus on what really matters. Sharing ideas, expressing emotion, and building understanding. Our voice, in its truest form, becomes a reflection of our identity, not a mask to hide behind. The more we trust it, the more others will too. Every person's voice, regardless of how it sounds, holds value. It is not merely a sound. It is a vessel for thought, creativity, and emotion. Yet so many of us spend our lives trying to mute or minimize our voices because we've been made to believe they aren't good enough. Whether it's due to a negative comment in childhood, a playback recording that made us cringe, or comparison to someone else's seemingly flawless speech, these moments accumulate and convince us that our voice should be hidden. But the truth is, no matter how uncertain we feel about our voice, it deserves to be shared with the world just as it is. When we silence ourselves, we don't just lose sound, we lose stories, ideas, and perspectives that no one else can offer. Each voice carries with it a unique life experience, a different way of seeing the world, and a distinct energy that can resonate with others. By choosing not to speak, not to sing, not to share, we unintentionally deprive others of the opportunity to connect with us. A teacher's voice can spark understanding, a storyteller's voice can ignite imagination, and a friend's voice can provide comfort. These everyday miracles are only possible when we allow our voices to be heard, regardless of how imperfect we believe they are. Too often, people wait for their voice to improve before they use it, waiting until they sound more confident, more polished, or more professional. But confidence is not something that appears before action. It is something built through consistent practice and self-acceptance. The only way to become more comfortable with your voice is to use it. To speak in meetings, to record messages, to sing out loud, to express yourself without hesitation. The more you do, the more your brain begins to normalize the sound of your voice, and the less judgment you place on it. Your voice becomes less of a barrier and more of a bridge to everything you want to express. When we finally begin to honor our voice as part of who we are, something powerful happens. We stop viewing it as a problem to be fixed and start seeing it as a tool to be celebrated. We realize that our voice is not separate from us. It is a reflection of our courage to show up, to speak, and to be present in the world. It doesn't need to be perfect to be powerful. Whether speaking to one person or 1,000, your voice carries the power to inspire, to influence, and to make a difference. All it requires is that you allow it to be heard. So if you've ever felt ashamed, awkward, or uncomfortable about your voice, know that you're not alone. And more importantly, know that those feelings don't define your worth or your ability to communicate. Your voice may not sound perfect to you, but it carries your truth, your ideas, and your presence. Let go of the comparisons, silence the inner critic, and speak with the confidence that your voice matters, because it does. In a world that needs more honesty, courage, and individuality, the most powerful thing you can do is to speak up just as you are.